of 15 Celsius. It's a dry afternoon across East Anglia with plenty of sunshine. However, cloud will move across the region from the south later. Temperatures near average, reaching highs of 16 Celsius. Mostly dry across the south with a mix of cloud and sunny spells for many on Sunday afternoon. Heading into the evening, cloud and rain accompanied with strong winds, coastal gales developing in places. And that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV,
on radio
and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello and welcome, I'm Alastair Stewart, and for the next 2 hours I'll be keeping you company on TV and radio with the stories that matter across the country. We've plenty coming up today. Turmoil in the Tory party, but behind the plots and speculation there's a profound struggle underway for the soul of the Conservative Party. How it's resolved will affect us all. Plus, a Brit abroad in Ukraine. A former guest on this programme makes us a video from the front line of the aid effort. All of that and lots more, but first let's bring you right up to date with all of today's news. Here's Tamsin Roberts.
Alistair, thank you. Good afternoon from the GB Newsroom. The Prime Minister and her new Chancellor will work on restoring credibility when they meet later, following weeks of economic turmoil and policy U-turns. Jeremy Hunt is now putting together a new fiscal plan after saying the mini-budget went too far, too fast. He's still warning of a difficult period, saying some taxes won't be cut as quickly as people want, others will rise and spending could be squeezed to help balance the books. The Chancellor, who insists Liz Truss is still in charge, spoke to BBC's Sunday with Laura Koonsberg.
I talked it through with the Prime Minister and I wanted to check that she was happy that I'm totally honest with people about the challenge, and we are going to have to take some very difficult decisions both on spending and on tax. Spending is not going to increase by as much as people hoped.
The Shadow Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, is calling for a general election.
it's not about a change of Chancellor. Look, they can't simply reverse what they've done through something as straightforward as that. They can't simply get around the fact that the Bank of England and the government have been in completely different places for the last month. They've got to recognise what they have done requires the chance for a real fresh start, and that will require a general election.
The Home Secretary has announced plans to crack down on protests that cause serious disruption and threaten public safety. Suella Braverman says the measures aim to stop demonstrators from holding the public to ransom. She says police will be given new powers to take a more proactive approach, specifically targeting tactics used by some climate activists. The Home Office says it will include protecting access to essential goods, services and key infrastructure. The government is pushing ahead with a law to keep Britain moving during transport strikes. Legislation will be introduced to ensure minimum service levels are maintained during a walkout. Unions are criticising the move, saying it will be unworkable. It's after a summer of travel chaos caused by disputes over pay and conditions. The measures are expected to come into force next year. Travel expert Simon Calder says there are practical problems that need to be worked out.
If you say, right, we're going to run 40% of trains, who decides which ones those are and who decides who's allowed to go on them? Because they're all going to fill up. So there's lots of problems associated with it. And as you were saying, it's not going to come until next year anyway, if it gets through a very divided Parliament. And it will be interesting to see how it does work and whether you can actually do this.
Iran says 4 inmates have been killed and 61 injured in a fire at Tehran's Evin prison. The jail is notorious for holding political prisoners. The blaze comes amid ongoing unrest following the death of Mahsa Amini. The 22-year-old died in custody after allegedly violating the country's strict dress code for women, triggering widespread protests. Security officials say calm has now been restored at the facility. A fall in the value of the pound has added 7 pence per litre to petrol bills over the past year. The Competition and Markets Authority found rising oil prices and bigger profit margins at refineries are also driving up fuel costs, accounting for a 20 pence hike in prices. Government figures show the average price of a litre of petrol is now £1.62 compared to £1.37 a year ago. More than 1,000 Paddington bears left by members of the public in memory of the late Queen have now found a new home. An image of the Queen consort surrounded by the toys has been released to mark their donation to children's charity Barnardo's. The bears were left at Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle by mourners in the days after Queen Elizabeth's death. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens, of course. Now, though, it's back to Alastair.
Tamsin, thank you very much indeed. The forced resignation of Boris Johnson as Prime Minister on July the 8th was the culmination of a period of grave disquiet within the Conservative Party. It prompted a hotly contested leadership struggle, which saw fresh faces with fresh ideas fall by the wayside. Old hands fall even earlier in the contest, with MPs finally settling on a choice between a supposedly safe pair of hands, former Chancellor Rishi Sunak, and a radical advocate of a new economics, the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss. Now, MPs voted for the former. The membership spoilt their plans by picking the latter. She then shocked pretty well everybody by doing just what she'd promised she'd do. She launched a radical mini-budget, eschewing Treasury orthodoxy, borrowing big to help cut energy bills and to slash a range of taxes, but without detailing where that money would come from or, on the assumption it would be borrowed, how it would be paid back. So, in short order, the whole thing fell apart. The money markets went crazy, measures were rolled back, the Chancellor was sacked, more measures were scrapped as the new Chancellor was appointed, who's now warned that some taxes may rise. Spending will not rise as quickly as had been hoped for. Some areas may even be cut. Yep, Jeremy Hunt said, and I quote, "We need to show the world that we have a plan that adds up financially," and added just this morning, quote again, "Nothing's off the table on tax cuts or spending." Well, the detail of that plan will be unveiled on the 31st of October. Then, just a few days later, on the 3rd of November, the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee meets, with the Governor of the Bank of England already warning that interest rates may need to rise by even more than had previously been expected. The Tories are at an historic low in the opinion polls, their leader lower still. Labour's riding high on the crest of a mainly silent wave. They need to say little or nothing to gain from the turmoil within the Tory party. So where does it all leave the government? For now, your government, whether you like it or not, and indeed the Conservative Party. Some say a conspiracy of traditionalists and an anti-Tory media did for Truss. Others, even within the Conservative Party fold, like Robert Halfon, say it was entirely self-inflicted, with the Truss government giving the impression that it's run by libertarian jihadists, blowing up the Conservative Party and the country in the process. So, I've invited critics and supporters of Liz Truss to offer their views and to ponder the ways forward, insofar as there are many. We'd really like to know what your thoughts, fears and the rest of it are as well. You can do it, as always, by sending an email to gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can go on Facebook, you can tweet @GBNews, or you can tweet me directly. I also want to hear your views. Was Truss wrong all along? Was there a conspiracy against her? Is it recoverable for her, her government and indeed her party? And I'm delighted to say I tweeted a bit like that last night and first thing this morning, and you've already been getting in touch. So let's just kick off with three quick ones. John says, recent events demonstrate that over a 5-year parliamentary term, there is no democracy at a national level. Voting in a general election is like setting off a fire-and-forget missile, and you've got no idea where it's heading or what it's going to destroy. Peter says some Tory members supported Truss for good reasons. Many were swayed by what the Prime Minister now accepts was a false prospectus. Others would have awarded first prize at the village dog show to a stray cat if they thought it was more ideologically pure than the vicar's pedigree Labrador. And finally, Johnny says nothing in the 2019 Tory manifesto has been delivered or properly delivered. Irrespective of which faction in the Tory party holds sway, delivering the manifesto must be their number one aim. Do this, and they might regain some voter respect. So that's just a taste of what you're thinking and saying so far. Do keep them coming in. Let's get our conversations here live in the studio underway with Aubrey Allegretti, good friend of mine, regular on the programme, political correspondent of The Guardian. Whether it's plots or speculation right across all of the newspapers today, am I right in suggesting that there is a struggle for the ideological heart of the Conservative Party yet again underway?
There certainly is, and I think part of the frustration that the public have is that we spent the months that you talked about during the summer watching, waiting nervously for the sort of business of government to be getting on with, and yet again the Conservative Party has descended back into this kind of this rupturing, this navel-gazing exercise with Liz Truss at the top trying to keep the party together. Now, her bringing Jeremy Hunt into the fold as the new Chancellor has sort of bought her a little bit of time, but she's only got about 10, 12, 14 days before that mini-budget on the 14th.
Well, interestingly, the most vicious and sharpened barbs are coming from within the Tory camp rather than from Labour or the Liberal Democrats. And former Tory leader himself, William Hague, says that Liz Truss is hanging by a thread, and Starmer says it's just a grotesque chaos. But Hague can't be, I mean, he can be a part of a move to oust her. Starmer can't.
No, and one of the ways that Labour is looking at this is just let the Conservatives kind of get on with ripping each other apart. And there is a certain extent to which that is very, very helpful for them in the polls. But because of all the briefing, the way that the sort of rebels are talking about Liz Truss, and the people in Downing Street don't seem to want to back down either, that's only sort of worsening relations, and it's not going to create any better blood come the 31st when she needs to get them all in behind her.
Do you believe, given your experience, and although you write for The Guardian, but I know for a fact that you talk to all sides right across the spectrum because that's what your job is, that Jeremy Hunt, with no experience in the Treasury but years of experience at the pounding heart of government, can steady the ship?
He can in the interim. So we have that 10, 12, 14-day period up until the mini-budget. But at that point, it's not going to be warm words. and the sort of ways that he tries to corral the Tory party together, it's going to be about the actions. It's going to be about where the spending cut axe falls, which tax cuts go, and how he can answer the question of what is the point of Liz Truss if the reason that she stood for the leadership is completely gone.
Yeah, and I finish where I started. It's not only what's the purpose of Liz Truss, and I take the point that you're making there, but it is also, and what we'll be talking to Damien Green about next, and then Christopher Chope in a moment, is what's the Conservative Party for? That's really the bottom line.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want you to stay where you are, listen to what Damien and Christopher have to say, and if you feel so moved, to chip in afterwards. But for the time being, Aubrey, thank you very, very much indeed. Now, my next guest, as I said, is an old friend of mine and a good friend of this programme. When he was last on this programme, in the wake of the Kwasi-Kwarteng budget, he notably said that Conservatives need to remember it isn't just about money and wealth. It's about values, and it's even about compassion. Damien Green's the Conservative Member of Parliament for Ashford in Kent, and himself a former Deputy Prime Minister. Great to see you.
Good afternoon.
Robert Halfon is not one for hyperbole, but is known within Tory circles as a kind of blue-collar, working-class Tory. How close are you to his description that this is a government giving the impression that it's run by libertarian jihadists blowing up the Tory party and the country in the process?
Well, I think the appointment of Jeremy Hunt, as Aubrey was just saying, says that that's if that was ever the case, then it's not anymore. I agree with Robert that libertarianism can be one element of a Conservative Party, but it is not conservatism. Conservatism is about more than cutting the size of the state, cutting taxes and so on. It is taking a pragmatic view about what's best for this country, which will be different at different times. And I think the appointment of Jeremy Hunt does mark quite a significant change in the underlying purpose of the government, because Jeremy is a grown-up, will say, this is what we need to do now. Some of it will be painful, some of it will be welcome, but it's all got to be done because among the, obviously the ultimate market for any political party is the electorate and doing the best thing for the country, so the electorate see that. But in the interim, there's this hugely important audience of the markets. And the first thing the government's got to do is to regain the credibility of the city, of both the gilts markets and the currency markets, and that's where October 31st is so important.
Absolutely. And I just remind folk kind enough to either watch or listen to our conversation on GB News TV and radio that, in fact, you know exactly what you're talking about on both fronts, because when you and I first met, you were a business correspondent, and that was a world that you mastered and did extremely well in. Does it not trouble you, however, now turned into being a very senior politician, that what you've just said is what one of our great political parties in this country does, and what the membership of that party chose, and the leader that it chose to do something, that is now judged and either accepted or rejected by the men and women in the city?
That does worry me, that I think the Conservative Party's reputation for basic economic competence lies at the heart of our long-term appeal. We are the most successful political party in the world over several centuries, and we lose that at our absolute peril. And so Jeremy Hunt has got a huge task, which he's got to get a long way along in the next 2 weeks to restore that. But restoring that is very important. But it's not impossible, because we know that if you present a budget where the numbers add up, then people will think, OK, fine, and hopefully we can then have a period of stability.
Tobias Ellwood was on the programme yesterday, and maybe bearing in mind what we said about what Robert Halfon had said, Tobias perhaps nuanced it slightly. And he said to me, at least this crazy right-wing experimental economics has been seen off, close quotes. Had a go at the experiment, didn't work, now been rejected. But for the members of your party who voted for Liz Truss, that means a low-tax, cut spending, smaller state dash for growth is now off the agenda. Tried it, didn't like it, City rejected it, didn't work.
It's a question of timing. There is a time to cut taxes, and we all want to see smaller states, bigger citizens. Every Conservative wants to see taxes down. But I would remind people that the budget often people think of as the Nigel Lawson budget, the radical Nigel Lawson budget in the late 1980s. That was 9 years after Margaret Thatcher came to power. She had taken a huge number of very painful decisions and gone through very many painful things.
Including raising some taxes.
Including raising some taxes, before she judged the time was right to have a radical tax-cutting budget. And broadly speaking, it worked. And Britain was by then growing more prosperous and had a very, very prosperous 1990s, partly because of that. So it's not the ultimate aim that any Conservative would dispute. It's the timing of it, and that's a matter of political judgment.
Yeah, and absolutely fascinating. I remind folk of what I said at the very beginning when you were last on talking about Kwasi's budget, when you said it's about values, it's not just about money. But to what extent is Jeremy Hunt's incredibly difficult decision about the indexation of benefits for those at the lowest end of the earnings scale, whether they are increased as traditionally they would have been by inflation, which is much higher and therefore by definition much more expensive, or by the rise in average earnings, which to many working people who pay taxes might seem fairer, but is pretty damned hard on those who are at the bottom end of the spectrum?
Yes, I know.
Is that a key acid test for him?
I think it is, and I've said publicly that I think in the current climate and with all the difficulties people are facing, that benefits should go up in line with inflation, as a previous administration promised. So I think that will be a kind of litmus test for compassionate conservatism. And I say that knowing that that's putting an added difficulty on the calculations inside the Treasury, that means something else will have to go. It may mean that another tax has to rise. I mean, for what it's worth, to say something on the other side, I think it would probably be sensible to at least defer the cut in the income tax rate. I think that would save a significant chunk of money. But there will have to be other tough decisions made on October 31st. Yeah.
My final question to you, because you've been very candid and very clear on the ideological tussles that are going on, and I'm going to come back to get Aubrey's reaction to it. I mean, the newspapers are great for people like the three of us, and I hope some of the good people at home who love a good story and a good bit of gossip and what have you. But whether it's parachuting Rishi in with Penny Mordaunt moved up to the Foreign Office, or Ben Wallace, who didn't even run, coming in from Defence as being the solution to it all, do you give any credence, as a very experienced and safe pair of hands in these matters, to any of that? Or is what we've got right now, Truss hanging on and Hunt trying to pick up the slack, what should now last for the foreseeable future?
I think it should last for more than the foreseeable future. That's what I want to see. You say it's great for the three of us. It's not great for me at all. I'm not a commentator. I am an active player in this, and as such, I want this government, this Prime Minister, to succeed. And to do that, we need a budget that convinces everyone at the end of this month, and then a period of stability so that we can carry on doing some of the other things. One of your texters said we need to get back to the 2019 manifesto. Yeah. There was a lot of good stuff in that manifesto. It was very popular. I would very much like to concentrate on those areas of policy more than this immediate crisis.
Always good to see you. Thank you very much indeed for coming in, Damien. So on the ideological struggle, there are a few more eloquent advocates for one side of it: compassion, sensible, calm, grown-ups back in charge. Is his optimism there at the end something that he can take away and bank, or is it over-optimistic in your view?
Well, I think it was very interesting. I mean, if Liz Truss still has people like Damien Green on side, who obviously is very influential amongst the sort of One Nation circle of Conservative MPs, then she probably has a little bit more time. There's been a lot of plotting going on over the weekend, continuation of the sorts of things we've been seeing over the last few weeks, but it's expected to intensify. I've been speaking to people that are preparing to put in their letters of no confidence at the start of next week. But the things that Damien, and therefore Liz, because he's supporting her, still have to hope for is that there isn't yet a mechanism to get rid of the Prime Minister, and there isn't yet a sort of natural successor who might...
Supposed to be a meeting this very weekend with Sir Graham Brady, the chair of the 22 committee, to discuss all of that.
I think he's been on holiday in Greece, of all places, so he's had to probably dart back quickly to make that. But
I think Graham Brady's almost as good at holidays as John Major was at dental appointments. not available when required. stay where you are because we've got another fascinating guest coming up. But again, Damien, my genuine and personal thanks to you for coming in and joining in our conversation. Damien Green there, Conservative Member of Parliament for Ashford, former Deputy Prime Minister. Now, from the other side of the argument, and I don't think he'll mind my saying that, I'm delighted to be joined now by Sir Christopher Chope, who's the Conservative Member of Parliament for Christchurch, an ardent tax cutter and a vociferous and very public Liz Truss supporter. Christopher, good of you to join us this Sunday afternoon. Should Liz have tried to hold her ground despite the markets, despite interest rates and the polls?
I think she should have done, and that's why it's a big disappointment to me that she did give ground and seemed to have caved in to the anti-growth coalition, which she so much identified as being the big problem during her conference speech. But we must take some comfort from the fact that, did I hear Damien say that he was giving the Prime Minister his unequivocal support? If so, he didn't exactly use those words. That's great news, because I had a meeting in my constituency last night, and all bar one of the very large attendants were giving the Prime Minister their unequivocal support and saying that Conservative MPs need to get behind her and unite and show what Conservatives have done in the past, which is that if they unite together, then they can rule the world.
Yeah, I think, to be clear, and he's sitting opposite me right now and will throw something at me if I get it wrong, that what Damien said was that period of stability that you and your constituents down in Christchurch have just described is exactly what Damien also wants. Let the Prime Minister now get on with a new Chancellor, restore stability and get the job done. He's nodding in agreement to that, so we are at one. But here's the problem for you, Christopher, and it's articulated brilliantly in the Telegraph this morning by Dan Hannan. Everything that she stood for, and I interviewed her twice during the leadership campaign, for those low tax, shrinking state, lower spending, it's all gone. If she stays in office, as you and Damien want, it is not on a prospectus that she was elected to that office on. It's a false premise.
Well, Alastair, it depends whether we describe what has happened in the last 48 hours as a tactical retreat or a strategic defeat. And I hope that it's a tactical retreat, and that after a bit more stability is restored, then we will proceed with our tax-cutting, growth-creating agenda. And so I'm more confident than I think a lot of other people are that if we give the Prime Minister our unstinting support, then she will be able to get back on track. And why did this all happen? Because she did what I think was absolutely right, which was to put a cap on energy prices. Otherwise, all hell would have broken loose for our households across the country and also for businesses. So she did the right thing there. She's got very little credit for that. But the other side of that coin was that it did damage the stability in the markets.
This is dangerous consensus, because Damien also said that he also wanted tax cuts, but when the time was right and when the economics was right. I want to finish. We've got a couple of minutes left, Christopher, but this is, to me, very important, and I think is important for the party that both you and Damien support. You said, and I quote, Liz Truss has also captured the imagination of Conservative supporters. And it speaks to a stark problem, and that is the division between the parliamentary party, which you and Damien are both members of, and the party in the country that you were describing you had a meeting with in Christchurch last night. How do you bridge that gap between what the majority of Tory MPs in Parliament wanted and what the majority of ordinary Conservative Party members in the country wanted?
Well, we stick to our party constitution, which provides that the parliamentary party choose the final two candidates, and then those candidates go before the mass membership of the Conservative Party. And that's what happened. And there was a series of hustings right across the country. And Liz Truss got 58%, which wasn't a bad majority. So I think that if we try to change the rules, as some people are doing, to exclude the membership, the mass membership, from being able to have a say in the leadership of the party, then that would be thoroughly undemocratic.
Sunday afternoon to be with us. Always a pleasure to talk to you. And my love to the lovely Christchurch, one of my favourite places. Thank you very much indeed. Christopher Chope there, Tory MP for Christchurch. Just before we go to the break, which we must do, this is fascinating because two proper grown-ups from different parts of the party saying, you know, this is the Tory party in action. We exist to govern, to retain power with the most successful party in history. And sometimes we got to swallow a little bit of our pride and lick our wounds.
Yes, we had quite a lot of agreement between the two of them there, actually, which I thought was really interesting. And as long as Liz Truss can convince her real core base of supporters to stick with her and that they don't feel that the whole project that they got behind is completely dead and deserted, as long as she can dangle that prospect in front of them in the future and say this is going to come maybe in 6 months, a year, just before the general election, she might be able to hold them off.
Absolutely right. And both Damien and Christopher kept the prospect of tax cuts when the time is appropriate open. Aubrey, thank you very much indeed. Damien, good of you to sit in and listen to Sir Christopher as well. And quoted twice by him, which is a noble gesture on a Sunday afternoon. Thank you both very much indeed. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News. We've lots more to come up on today's programme. Continuing the Prime Minister and her new Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt. They'll be meeting later on to talk about restoring stability to the UK's economy. And we'll be speaking to our political correspondent next. But first, let's bring you up to date with the weather.
Ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking blustery with showers becoming confined to the far north. Elsewhere, mostly dry with sunny spells. Let's take a look at the details. Blustery showers continuing to affect the north and west of Scotland, but these easing later. Elsewhere, dry with decent sunny spells. Feeling cold with a high of 11 Celsius. Becoming increasingly cloudy across Northern Ireland, but the far north and east holding on to some sunshine well into the afternoon. Temperatures reaching 11 Celsius. Dry with prolonged sunny spells, it will become increasingly hazy from the west during the afternoon. Winds continue to increase into the evening. Fine and dry during the afternoon, but cloud will increase, heralding the arrival of outbreaks of rain from the west later. It'll be feeling fairly chilly in the wind with highs of 14 Celsius. Fine and dry with prolonged sunny spells for most across the Midlands, some patchy cloud around in places, feeling chilly in the wind with temperatures near average with highs of 15 Celsius. It's a dry afternoon across East Anglia with plenty of sunshine. However, cloud will move across the region from the south later. Temperatures near average, reaching highs of 16 Celsius. Mostly dry across the south with a mix of cloud and sunny spells for many on Sunday afternoon. Cloud will continue to increase with outbreaks of rain arriving late in the day. Heading into the evening, cloud and rain accompanied with strong winds, coastal gales developing in places. And that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello, good afternoon. It's 12:31. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. Here are the headlines. The Prime Minister and her new Chancellor will work on restoring credibility when they meet later, following weeks of economic turmoil and policy U-turns. Jeremy Hunt is now putting together a new fiscal plan after saying the mini-budget went too far too fast. He's still warning of a difficult period, saying some taxes won't be cut as quickly as people want, others will rise and spending could be squeezed to help balance the books. The Home Secretary has announced plans to crack down on protests that cause serious disruption and threaten public safety. Suella Braverman says the measures aim to stop demonstrators from holding the public to ransom. She says police will be given new powers to take a more proactive approach, specifically targeting tactics used by some climate activists. The government is pushing ahead with a law to keep Britain moving during transport strikes. Legislation will be introduced to ensure minimum service levels are maintained during a walkout. Unions are criticising the move, saying it'll be unworkable. The measures are expected to come into force next year. Iran says 4 inmates have been killed and 61 injured in a fire at the Evin prison. The blaze comes amid ongoing unrest following the death of Mahsa Amini. The 22-year-old died in custody after allegedly violating the country's strict dress code for women, triggering widespread protests. Security officials say calm has now been restored. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Alastair.
So, as you just heard in the news, Prime Minister and a new Chancellor will work on restoring credibility when they meet later today, following weeks of economic turmoil and policy U-turns. Jeremy Hunt is now putting together a new fiscal plan after saying the mini-budget went too far, too fast. Speaking to Laura Koonsberg this morning on the BBC, he also said that there will be no return to the 2010 style of austerity. Well, joining me now is our very own political correspondent, Catherine Forster. Come to that in a moment. First of all, you were sitting out there when I was talking to Damien Green and Christopher Chope. As it were, I don't think either of them would deny it, the two wings of the Conservative Party, One Nation and Tax Cutter, Small State and what have you, trying for a real body of agreement there.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, one Liz Truss supporter I spoke to yesterday was saying absolutely there is a need for a period of calm. But whether there's really any chance of a period of calm happening, I'm not sure. I mean, the Conservative Party are in a very difficult position now. There is very little agreement. They agree they're in a terrible mess. They agree that something needs to change. They agree they don't want a general election. But beyond that, there is zero consensus. Do they keep her? Do they hope? I mean, obviously, Liz Truss has brought Jeremy Hunt in, trying to reset her premiership, trying to calm the markets, which may be successful. We will see in the coming days. But, you know, genuine questions now about who is in fact in charge.
Absolutely.
Because Jeremy Hunt has made it very clear that a lot of the mini-budget was a mistake, that a lot of it is going to have to go, that a lot of her vision for low taxes to get growth is going to have to be scrapped, and indeed taxes are going to have to rise.
Yeah. And the front page of, for those listening to our conversation on radio rather than watching on television, there we are, front page of the Sunday Telegraph, Hunt delays 1p tax cut as well. Yes. So that was going to be a Rishi Sunak thing in the future. Liz said bring it forward. Kwasi said we brought it forward. Jeremy is now saying no, wait.
A lot of Rishi Sunak policies now are going to be enacted, which begs the question, if these are Rishi Sunak's policies, why not just put Rishi Sunak in charge? Of course, There's many that would like him to be, but very problematic. He is seen as one of the main reasons why Boris Johnson is no longer in office. Many members, many MPs, very upset about that. Think it was the wrong call. They were a few points behind in the polls. Look at them now, but zero agreement. I mean, the Sunday papers are full of plots. Ben Wallace, would he be a unity candidate? The idea of Penny Mordaunt and Rishi Sunak jointly seems to be for the birds. Penny Mordaunt thinks she can get there on her own. There's no way that Rishi Sunak would play second fiddle to her. And in the Sunday Times this morning, the extraordinary story that this friendship and loyalty between Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, that actually 2 weeks ago at the party conference, her people were already sounding out, supposedly, Sajid Javid, former Chancellor, as a possible replacement for Kwarteng 2 weeks ago. Now, Number 10 are denying this, but their quote saying, Liz Truss was in Cabinet for 10 years, she knows who's good and who's, I can't say the word on TV, is not going to bring any unity either. So it really is a terrible mess they're in.
Yeah.
And who knows, things change very, very fast, as we've found. But the last 6 weeks have been astonishing.
Finally, I want to give a very public hurrah and shout out for Robert Halfon, who I like very much and I count as a friend, often on this programme in his capacity as very thoughtful chair of the Education Select Committee. What he said was incendiary, but he said it in an article in the Times newspaper under his name and signed. A bunch of jihadis tearing up the Conservative Party and tearing up the country. At least he had the guts to say it publicly.
Yes, he's very well respected, very popular within the party, very well thought of. And he wrote the piece in the Times, but he's also been on broadcast this morning, and he accused the government of treating people like laboratory mice. So, not mincing his words, and there are many others that feel like him, but where they go from here is far from clear.
Fascinating. Catherine, always a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed. I think you're coming in again in the second hour. Brilliant. As we always say on these occasions, hit the phones and find out what's really going on out there. Catherine Forster there, GB News TV and radio political correspondent. And indeed, you are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, with plenty more still to come this afternoon, including Nature Safe is on a mission to save animals from extinction by collecting, indefinitely storing and then regenerating reproductive cells and cell lines from endangered animal species. And you just saw there a magnificent rhino, but it all started with a very good friend of mine who knows more about show jumping horses than many people will ever know. I really look forward to speaking to him, one of the pioneers behind that, next. But first, a quick break.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christie. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back. It's just past 20 to 1 and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends here on GB News. I met my next guest and friend on the show jumping circuit. He owned Big Star, one of the world's greatest ever show jumping horses that carried the great Nick Skelton to Team Olympic gold in London and individual gold in Rio. Now, Big Star retired in 2017 at the Royal Windsor Horse Show, but the memories and the genes carry on. Tullis Matson's one of the pioneers of breeding and especially artificial insemination in this country and the world. It's made him a bob or two along the way, and rightly so, but now he's pouring some of that money into a much broader application. Nature's Safe is his mission to save animals from extinction by collecting, indefinitely storing and then regenerating reproductive cells and cell lines from endangered species. And I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Tullis Matson for today's Rural Spotlight. We have been trying to do this for so long, and me coming up to you and all the rest of it, and I'm thrilled to bits that we are able to do this. I gave the show jumping intro bit, but your interest in this area of biology actually goes back 30 years, doesn't it?
Yes, I mean, I've always had a great passion for rare breeds. I was a trustee of the Rare Breed Survival Trust, and we've been trying to save the Suffolk Punch breed. You know, there's less than about 70 females left in the country, and we've found new technologies the way we can do this. And we've been doing that for quite a while. They're the ones that put food on our table in the 1940s. You know, I've got a picture of a grandfather ploughing the fields with them and bringing the harvest, and it was so sad to see them maybe disappear. And we thought, well, if we can save a Suffolk Punch, do you think we can do the same to a rhino or an elephant and things like that? And it's very similar sort of technology. And then we did some digging around, and we've got a great team that we've brought together, and realised actually there's very little in the conservation of living biobanks. There's lots of biobanks up there, but keeping these tissues in a living state so we can bring them back to life in 10, 20, 30, maybe 1,000 years' time, with nearly 50 to 100 species a day going extinct. Something is absolutely vital. To date, we've chosen 144 species just in the last year.
144, because while you were giving that last answer, we were showing some pictures for folk listening to the conversation on radio of the great big vats of, I presume it's liquid nitrogen or something, storing. And I was going to say, how many have you got? Because the other thing that intrigues me about it is we both love horses of any sort, and you mentioned Suffolk Punches. You know, I've got an Exmoor, which is a rare breed as well, but we're both mainly into show jumping. This kind of science and biology has been the rule of thumb for flat racing forever and a day. You brought it in a big way into show jumping. Was that the point at which it struck you that this same science could be applied to help preserve those endangered species? Was that the light bulb moment, Tullis?
It very much was. They're not actually allowed to use this in the thoroughbred world. It's the sport horse world. We can use these new technologies. They've got a sort of... but yes, that's exactly it. I thought, well, if we can save this amazing animal, the Suffolk Punch, which is truly incredible, and all the other rare breeds, why can't we transfer this over to other animals? And it's, you know, when these animals pass away at a zoo, it's an incredibly sad moment, obviously, but now it shines a shining light at the end of the tunnel. We can actually do something with that cell at the end of the day, and actually use that cell to maybe regenerate and stop that species from going extinct in the future. I mean, it really can make, I mean, a lot of the science is here and now, we can do it, but some of the stuff we don't really know what is going to be for the future. But what we do know, if we don't freeze these cells now, we have lost many of our species forever. And me and you, most probably going to be all right, but it's the future generations that are really, really going to suffer. And, you know, they're the ones that are going to look back at us and saying, why haven't you done something about it? And now we can. And it's fascinating. I've just been to a conservation conference in Belgium, sorry, not Belgium, in Portugal 2 weeks ago. 900 participants all over the world. And it's great to see Nature Safe really being highlighted out there as the sort of the prototype of the living biobank for the rest of the world. And it's great to see what we started in the UK is now going to spread all over the world, hopefully.
It's also great, and give a shout out to our mutual friend Nina Barber for places like Bolesworth and Daisy Bunn at Hickstead, who also support and promote the work that you're doing, because that really matters. Brilliant women at the cutting edge of our sport. I tell you what really made me fall off my stool, though, was the briefing notes that you helped my team produce. The World Wildlife Fund suggests that global wildlife populations have sunk 69% since 1970. You said 140 species. The scale of this threat really shocked me.
Oh, it is. It's enormous. There's about 6 million species on the planet. There's about 1 million at risk. There's 40,000 critically endangered. It's huge. It's absolutely huge. So obviously it's a charity and we need funding. And this is fully upscalable Nature Safe as well. So, it costs about only £100 to freeze one sample, even 5,000 to freeze a whole species down, which sounds a lot or doesn't sound a lot depending when you upscale it. But it's imperative, obviously, this is done now, because they, as they saw in that you were talking about, they're going extinct literally every 15 minutes. By the time we finish this interview, depending how long I go on for, but another species will have gone extinct, which is really, really frightening. But we can do something about it, which is great. And, and biobanking is is one of the cornerstones of conservation. So,
Sure. And while you were talking, I mean, you have no better advocates than pictures of baby rhino, and just after that, a baby orangutan as well. I mean, it just makes one's heart bleed to think that those creatures could be lost if people like you don't do your work. My penultimate question is this. You mentioned you were at a gathering in Portugal, and I know that you do the circuit around the UK and elsewhere promoting the good work that you do. Are governments, our own, or international organisations like the UN or UNESCO or anyone like that, are they engaged in what you're doing as well? Tell us.
That's brilliant. We are knocking on doors everywhere at the moment. So governments we've spoken to, I'm not going to stop naming names, but we have spoken to. It is quite difficult to get those. Oh, that's a great picture of all our team, and that's our local MP as well there, who's hopefully helping. We've asked her to help as well. So we're very much about a team effort, what we've done with the scientists and the zoo side. So, but yes, we would love support. We're doing at the Natural History Museum on the 23rd of February, we're actually holding an event at the Natural History to raise awareness of it. So we would love to get some politicians, and Serrano Fines is our guest lecturer there. So yes, if anybody's listening today, we'd love to open doors. We really would, because we need it.
Just had a picture up of Helen Morgan in a striking pink suit there, meeting and having a chat with you. Finally, you've got 10 seconds. Give folk at home the website address so they can look up more about what you're doing. Tell us.
So it's natures-safe.com, as soon as you put it in, and we'd love to hear from anybody who wants to get engaged with Nature Safe. It's not just about raising money, it's about opening doors and saving species from going extinct forever.
And I can assure you folk at home that he means that. It isn't just rattling the old can. He wants you to read and understand what they're doing, because it matters to all of us. Talis, I'm glad we finally did it. We will be in touch, and love from my family to yours, and look forward to seeing you very, very soon. Thank you very much indeed. One of my great friends there, Talis Maston, founder of Nature's Safe, and a giant, and he is actually very tall, as it happens, of the show jumping game as well. Now, last weekend, this is about a new friend. Lauren Barkley from the charity Giving to Ukraine spoke to us on the road with her friend Nikki Turnbull. It was Giving to Ukraine's third trip to the Polish-Ukraine border. Met her online through another friend, Matt Millen, who's also involved in the Ukraine equestrian charity effort. Now, Lauren, importantly, is an up-and-coming freelance journalist. So we were so amazed at what she had to say that we invited her to produce a short video report of her own about what she and Nikki saw and did. And I'm delighted to say she accepted. And for those listening on radio, this following report does contain interviews that are not in English. Now, you can watch it in its entirety with subtitles later on YouTube. And I very much hope that you do. So, first of all, here's the video, and then I'll have a quick chat with Lauren afterwards.
Усішки не співають. Ага. Нас вбивають, кого? Українців.
Вони хочуть знищити Україну нашу.
А в Польщі що ми робимо?
Ми тут, щоб нас російські не били.
5-year-old Dima is just one of the young people I met whilst travelling with Giving to Ukraine to deliver aid to Poland. Dima currently relies on volunteers like this group after he lost not only his parents, but his home, friends and school to the war. Now living in a home set up for orphaned Ukrainian children across the border in Poland, donations of aid are essential to children like him.
Kyiv, Odessa, many city, the bomb, and we escape and another people to the Poland. Right now it's 31 children here and 10 adult women, and maybe another 30 live here.
Like many volunteers supporting refugees in Poland, Peter relies entirely on donations of aid and food to continue the work he is doing. Giving to Ukraine are one of the groups helping people like Peter. When the war began, Stephen, whose daughters are keen horse riders, reached out to the equestrian community with an idea to fill horse boxes with aid and take them to the border. Quickly, this gathered momentum, and soon a convoy set off.
We went out the first time with 8 trucks. What we saw at the centres stays with you. When you see 1,500 mothers and children all with nowhere to go, nothing to do, bewildered, no future, it affects you, it stays with you.
This trip is the third since the war began and saw the team travel over 2,217 miles, delivering 5 lorries of aid and spend an extra $30,000 on food and essentials for refugee centres whilst there.
The Giving to Ukraine team have made it to their first stop in Poland, where they're currently delivering medical aid to Ermed, who are the Polish equivalent of the British Red Cross.
Ermed then deliver this medical aid across the border, sending in paramedics and doctors to help those injured. On the final stop of the trip, the team visited Poznan. Here they don't only provide emergency aid, but continue to work to support those now living in the area. Anna arrived here in April and now works as a volunteer in the centre, supporting other mothers and children who, like her, had to escape the war.
Ми якось не вірили, що буде так страшно, і вирішили залишитися. І чекали, поки переводити чекали, може закінчиться. І так воно все гірше і гірше було. Почали бомби кидати з самольота. Так аж стіни тряслися. Ми в коридорі між двома стінами. А деколи, коли треба було за водою йти або за їжею, дитину в підвалі залишали. Ми їй писали номер телефону.
With the recent increase in bombings across Ukraine and cold weather setting in, those in Poland are preparing for many more refugees to cross the border in need of assistance.
Remarkable stuff, starting with children and finishing with children. And the author of that report, I'm delighted to say, Lauren Barkley, indeed joins me live now. Thanks for accepting the commission and thanks for doing it. And it was lovely to see Stephen Barnes there again, who has also been on the programme. For me, the headline from that report was that the danger remains. It's very easy for us in the UK to talk to senior politicians in Ukraine, various negotiators and diplomats. I had one on the programme just yesterday. But for those ordinary people that you're dealing with, particularly the woman at the end saying, the danger is very real and it's still going on now, whatever you see in the newspapers. Does that shock, surprise or upset you?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's definitely noticeable talking to them there is that it isn't over, and I think we've lost a lot of media that was surrounding the war because it's going on, and there's other news stories, but it's definitely not over for the people there. And even whilst we were visiting the orphanage, Peter, who ran it, got the news that 30 more children were going to be joining that day because of the bombings that happened last week. The mother that was there, although she was volunteering in the centre, she didn't know where her husband was. Her daughter was now safe with her there, but for her home had been destroyed and she didn't know what the future looked like. And for her, it was simply the centre was what was keeping her going and giving her hope, and being able to speak to other mothers in that situation really helped her.
The other thing that I mean, metaphorically, but almost literally made us fall off our chairs when you and Nikki were on last weekend was when I, was invoiced you. So what are you taking out this time? Expecting you to say food and plasters and clothes. And I think it was Nikki who said we're taking baby toys and body bags. And that's what literally made our jaws drop. I mean, this is a life and death effort, is it not?
Oh, it definitely is. And I think one of the main partners that we work with is URMED, who take medical supplies to Ukraine. And it has been shocking that they are requesting more and more body bags. And it just hits home and tells you exactly what's going on out there. I think for some of them as well, if we didn't take that medical aid, it would be even more life or death for the people out there. And it just shows the continuing need. I think last time we went, we filled URMED's warehouse completely with medical aid, but only 4 months later, that's completely empty. And we've gone and filled it again today, last week. But I think the team want to try and go every 3 months. They're hoping to go again at Christmas. And I think what really worries these centres and the people providing the aid is as the weather gets colder and the war continues, they are thinking that more and more refugees are going to be crossing the border in need of aid. And they're worried that with all the media dropping out and people running out of time to volunteer. We've met volunteers in Poland that had completely given up their jobs for months, but have now had to go back and work because they simply can't continue to do that.
Yeah.
It's getting to the point that we need to keep the momentum going and keep the donations coming in so that we can continue to support what is still a terrible situation.
And captured and described brilliantly by you. Get in touch with us before you go for that trip around about Christmas time, and we'll talk again because we are interested in Ukraine, but we particularly want to reflect here on GB News the best of Brits doing their bit for people out there, and few better examples than you, Lauren Barkley. Thank you very much indeed, and you keep in touch with us.
Thank you very much again.
Good to see you.
too.
Lauren Barkley there, journalist and Giving to Ukraine volunteer. Their website is also online and available. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends. We've lots more coming up on the programme in our second hour, continuing our conversation on that big political story that appears to have taken over the news agenda pretty well all this week and certainly this weekend. But first, at 1.5 minutes to 1, we're going to take a quick break.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christie. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello and welcome if you've just joined us at 1 minute past 1. Hello and thanks for being with us since 12 if you've done that nice thing as well. I am Alastair Stewart and we're into our second and final hour on the programme, keeping you company here on TV and radio with plenty more still to come, including more on our top discussion, political turmoil within the Conservative Party. We'll also have the take within that of what they're thinking about in Scotland and, I hope, in Wales as well. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the rest of the day's news. Here's Tamsin Roberts.
Alastair, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past one. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. Fixing the UK economy is the new Chancellor's focus as he discusses his plan with the Prime Minister at Chequers this afternoon. Jeremy Hunt says his predecessor's mini-budget went too far, too fast, but he's warning the country still faces a difficult period. He says taxes won't be cut as quickly as people want and spending could be squeezed to help balance the books. The Chancellor, who insists Liz Truss is still in charge, spoke to BBC Sunday with Laura Koonsberg.
I talked it through with the Prime Minister and I wanted to check that she was happy that I'm totally honest with people about the challenge, and we are going to have to take some very difficult decisions both on spending and on tax. Spending is not going to increase by as much as people hoped.
Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds is calling for a general election.
It's not about a change of Chancellor. Look, they can't simply reverse what they've done through something as straightforward as that. They can't simply get around the fact that the Bank of England and the government have been in completely different places for the last month. They've got to recognise what they have done requires the chance for a real fresh start, and that will require a general election.
Firefighters are tackling a large blaze in Glasgow. Scottish Fire and Rescue was called to Kingston Street in the Tradeston area just before 10 o'clock this morning. People are being advised to close their windows and stay away from the area. There are no reports of any injuries. Just Stop oil protesters have sprayed orange paint over the outside of an Aston Martin car showroom in central London. Demonstrators can be seen sitting in the road, blocking Park Lane with a number, gluing themselves to the tarmac or locking themselves together. They're calling for the government to hold all new oil and gas licences and consents. Well, the Home Secretary's announced plans to crack down on protests that cause serious disruption and threaten public safety. Suella Braverman says the measures aim to stop demonstrators from holding the public to ransom. She says police will be given new powers to take a more proactive approach, specifically targeting tactics used by some climate activists. The Home Office says it will include protecting access to essential goods, services and key infrastructure. The government is pushing ahead with a law to keep Britain moving during transport strikes. Legislation will be introduced to ensure minimum service levels are maintained during a walkout. Unions are criticising the move, saying it'll be unworkable. It's after a summer of travel chaos caused by disputes over pay and conditions. The measures are expected to come into force next year. Travel expert Simon Calder says there are practical problems that need to be worked out.
If you say, right, we're going to run 40% of trains, who decides which ones those are and who decides who's allowed to go on them? Because they're all going to fill up. So there's lots of problems associated with it. And as you were saying, it's not going to come until next year anyway, if it gets through a very divided Parliament. And it will be interesting to see how it does work and whether you can actually do this.
Iran says 4 inmates have been killed and 61 injured in a fire at Evin prison. The jail is notorious for holding political prisoners. The blaze comes amid ongoing unrest following the death of Mahsa Amini. The 22-year-old died in custody after allegedly violating the country's strict dress code for women, triggering widespread protests. Security officials say calm has now been restored at the prison. A fall in the value of the pound has added 7 pence per litre to petrol bills over the past year. The Competition and Markets Authority found rising oil prices and bigger profit margins at refineries are also driving up fuel costs, accounting for a 20 pence hike in prices. Government figures show the average price of a litre of petrol is now £1.62 compared to £1.37 a year ago. More than 1,000 Paddington bears, left as a tribute to the late Queen, have found a new home. An image of the Queen Consort has been released to mark their donation to children's charity Barnardo's. The toys were left at Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle by mourners in the days after Queen Elizabeth's death was announced. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens, of course. Now, though, it's back to Alastair Stewart.
So, just 3 weeks after the leadership race, and there's notable chaos in the Conservative Party. Far from a strong and stable, the current government have had its fair share of trials and tribulations over the last week alone. Change of Chancellor, U-turns over the mini-budget and unrest within the unity of the party have given Prime Minister Liz Truss a big job to do over the coming days. The PM and the new Chancellor, as you just heard, are meeting later today to try and forge a new path forward for the good of the party and arguably for the nation. But with speculation of a power shift from number 10 to number 11 Downing Street, can Liz Truss actually cling on? We've asked for your views, hopes, fears and all the rest of it via GBViews at gbnews.uk, Facebook, GB@GBnews on Twitter, or me directly. And I'm going to share some of those back because you have been busy bunnies, for which I am very grateful. And I'm starting with Nigel. We already have record levels of tax revenue. Liz was right to think outside the box, but it seems governments don't govern. Other forces, including unelected people in the city, decide policy now. Russ says the simple truth is that over the past 12 years, the Conservatives have consistently failed properly to deliver anything that those who voted for them wanted. It's abundantly clear to anyone with eyes that our democracy is completely broken. Morgan says they're done for. They'll all be down the job centre come December with any luck. And finally, one that I haven't had time to put up on screen for you, but I'll just read it to you. It's a cracker. Henry says they're behaving like kids at the moment. They need to get a grip and address the immediate issues facing the country. Thanks for all of those. Keep them coming in. We're on air right up until 2 o'clock. Still with me is Aubrey Allegretti, political correspondent of The Guardian. I partly wanted to wing that one in there from Henry. They're behaving like kids at the moment, need to get a grip and address the immediate issues facing the country. Because you were here earlier at 12 o'clock when Damien Green from the left of the party and Sir Christopher Choke from the right of the party tried to do that, and Catherine Forster came in after you and said, good try, but it ain't going to convince anyone.
No, and there are some MPs who are preparing to make the situation a lot harder for Liz Truss.
Even as we speak?
Yes. During the break, I was speaking to one who is preparing to put in their letter of no confidence today. They want to create this kind of waterfall effect so that next week she doesn't have the breathing space that she wants. There's another MP who we're told is going to go public later today with their no confidence letter. Now, obviously, the one saving grace for her is that whether or not they reach 54 is kind of, it's a completely moot point because there is no mechanism yet to get rid of her. But there wasn't with Boris Johnson, there wasn't with Theresa May because they both survived no confidence vote. So they'll be looking at this and thinking, Liz Truss will be looking at this and thinking, those two were sort of fell on their sword, even though they weren't forced to go, I might be in the same position.
Yeah. It is slightly reminiscent of the Michael Howard coup, which was a coup that was imposed by men, and I suppose nowadays women as well in grey suits, but I'm not a sartorial expert on these matters. Somebody simply whispering in ears saying, look, hang on a moment, the game's up. We need to act before we have another public tearing apart, as they inflicted upon Boris Johnson and the party.
Yes, I think there was one woman on the 1922 committee officers, but she got promoted into government, so now it is just men in grey suits again. But yes, I mean, the idea might be that there would be a sort of unity candidate that people could get behind. But I mean, people couldn't even agree whether there was a joint ticket of Rishi Sunak and Penny Mordaunt, which of them should be the sort of first Lord Treasurer and which of them should be the second Lord Treasurer, i.e. the one in charge of number 10 and one in number 11. So there is no no harmony behind this. We're stuck in the same position as we were in July when Boris Johnson was ousted, where a competition was almost called by accident, a contest was almost called by accident, and there wasn't actually somebody that was ready to take on the leadership and had the full force of the party, both the voluntary wing and of the membership and the MPs as well. And that's the same problem we'll have if Liz Truss is ousted.
Sure. All of which speaks to two other points, as indeed did one of my correspondents, as it were. Where is it? It's that the judgment will be given by other people, including folk in the city. Damien Green confirmed that was the case, that Hunt had to come up with a new package on the 31st of October that would keep the money markets happy, keep interest rates not going any further, keep Andrew Bailey at the Bank of England hopefully on side come that meeting in early November when interest rates will have to go up, but hopefully not astronomically. We're left with the appearance here of the membership of the Conservative Party totally sidelined by men in suits and money boys and girls.
Well, potentially. I mean, obviously their choice was Liz Truss and she could face being ousted. And there is also the question of whether or not they even get a say in whether there's another contest. Because if it's the case that it's sort of stitched up by the MPs and they decide, for example, that all people who apply to become Prime Minister next should agree that the person that comes second drops out to avoid going to the membership, then that would mean that there are 170,000 roughly people in this country that won't get to pick the next Prime Minister. Obviously, if we get to that stage, it's much harder to argue that they have any kind of mandate because we are then 2 Prime Ministers removed from the person that won the last general election, i.e. Boris Johnson. So a very difficult circle to square.
Sure, it's extraordinary, and there's still an awful lot of people who tweet us and email us saying, bring back Boris and just sort it all out. There is a there is a constituency for that, and it ain't going away. Aubrey, great to see you. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. Always a pleasure to have you. Thanks for being here at 12 and then staying around and making those vital calls during the period in between. I want you to stay exactly where you are, though, and may have to increase your fee or something like that, because I want your views on my next 2 guests as well, because we are going to broaden our view out wider into the union as well, and therefore I think you will find my next couple of conversations interesting. So Aubrey Allegretti there, political correspondent from The Guardian, agreeing to stay exactly where he is, which you just saw on television. I did indeed want a view from north of the border, where a briefly resurgent Conservative Party seems down in the depths again. So I asked my friend Robert Kilgore to join me. He's been on the programme before. I met him at a dinner party, and we chatted and found that we had a lot in common. He's a Scottish property developer, he's an investor, but he's also a philanthropist, as well as being an entrepreneur, and the founder and chairman of SBUK, a cross-party Scottish business organisation of 500 businesses, and a unionist.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. First of all, put the philanthropist hat to one side, all the good works that you do, and you do genuinely do a great deal in that, and put that entrepreneur business hat firmly on. What did you make of the Kwasi Kwarteng budget, and how do you feel now that the vast majority of it is being rolled back?
Well, great to be back on with you, Alastair, and it's the first for me to be on the left of The Guardian. So I'm delighted to be on the left of The Guardian. On the couch. It is putting my entrepreneur's hat on. I am at heart, a simple businessman who tries to attract investment and create jobs in Scotland, and I've done that over the last 40 years to, I would like to say, a reasonable, fair degree of success. What business needs is government to create the right climate for us in business, to take the risks, create the jobs, create the wealth that pays the taxes, that then government can choose which of the vital public services that they focus on. As despite his many faults, many faults probably, Alex Salmond, when he was First Minister in Scotland, he engaged with business in Scotland and entrepreneurs. He saw the value in them and what they did to the community, to the economy, and he engaged, whereas Nicola Sturgeon, it's public sector good, private sector bad, full stop, and no interest in engaging with business or entrepreneurs at all. But on the budget, there were a lot of good things, I felt, in the mini budget. But that was yesterday. You know, this is today. A week is a long time in politics. I mean, what we've been through, I'm reminded of, you're too young to remember, but Alastair and I will remember season 9 of Dallas, where the entire season was a dream sequence. I almost feel like I'm in that at the moment. I can't quite believe what has happened. But Jeremy Hunt, shrewd move by the Prime Minister, very capable. I did a little bit of work with him when he was Health Secretary for several years. Very shrewd move, very capable politician. And I think that's a good move. And we need unity, not people putting letters in, etc. What households, what businesses and what the country needs is unity and stability. And I just wish that the politicians in the Westminster bubble would actually get a grip and get a grip of reality of what we in the real world have to deal with day in, day out.
Let me take you back to Scott. That was a brilliant critique and echoes very much what Christopher Chope and Damien Green were saying earlier on. A bit of stability, let's get the job done so that you know what the atmosphere is for investment and job creation. I want to take you back to Scotland, which is kind of where you began. Truss has been criticised for not reaching out either to Scotland or Wales, as it happened. I'm talking to someone from Wales in a moment. One of the defences is that she's been overwhelmed by other issues and therefore didn't have time to fully engage. But you've got a case before the Supreme Court that will pretty well decide whether or not there can be a second referendum. And in the Telegraph, I think you've got the article right there. Is Nicola Sturgeon, First Minister, saying Scotland's up, ready, here we go, hot to trot. Is that your reading of the buzz in Scotland?
Not at all. I mean, that first paragraph, Nicola Sturgeon said no country in history has been better prepared to become independent than Scotland. I mean, it's delusional, frankly. Completely delusional. What people in Scotland want, the latest poll had 7% of the Scottish public thought that having a second independence referendum was a priority. What people want, not households, workers, business people want, is both governments to work together. The Scottish Government and Westminster to work together on economic recovery.
7% saw it as a priority, but in terms of those in favour of independence and those against, it's a wee bit closer. But those in favour is still very, very well short of a majority.
Yes, but now is not the time. Economic recovery is what people want.
Yeah.
They want the Scottish Government and the UK Government, and it takes two to tango, definitely, to work together on economic recovery and also on the recovery of our public services, health, education, etc., which I don't need to remind you, Alastair, are fully devolved to Scotland and are in charge of, are run by the Scottish Government. But they want the governments to work together. Now, I know that Nicola Sturgeon has said that Liz Truss hasn't phoned her. I'm not aware if she has phoned her yet. But equally, I don't think Nicola Sturgeon picked up the phone to Liz Truss and congratulated her on her victory. I know two things on that. That I know they have spoken at the various events around the tragic death of the Queen and the funeral around that. And I also know that there have been attempts by Number 10, serious attempts to get a union round table at Number 10 as soon as possible. I believe one of the dates, a few of the dates have not been suitable to one or either of those involved. So it's not an ignoring of Scotland at all. I know from the discussions I have with Alastair Jack, who's our excellent Secretary of State, and other government with Nadeem Zahawi at the Cabinet Office, I've had discussions with him. The Union and Scotland is very much at the centre of their attention.
All right. We've got about a minute left. Final question, because your commentary after Nicola Sturgeon's leader speech at her party conference was intriguing. What do you think happens to Nicola Sturgeon if either she doesn't get that referendum or she gets it and loses it?
Well, the Supreme Court have had their evidence. They'll take several weeks or even a few months and then come back with their decision. I hope, obviously I'm biased, I hope that they say she can't have her advisory referendum next year. I think she knows that she's not going to win. Her speech to her conference, for example, was a blatant, I thought, a blatant job advert for a United Nations job that we all know she at heart would love to get. I mean, it was more about United Nations issues than about health and education, her day job in Scotland, which is what she's paid to do. It was absolutely horrendous from that point of view. I suspect she wants to go and go soon. Whether she can make this general election in 24, if she doesn't get what she wants from the Supreme Court, as a de facto referendum, which I cannot see, in my simple mind, I cannot see how that would work. Whether she goes before 24 or after 24, she is in my view, one foot out the door, and frankly, that's a good thing as far as union.
Robert, let's book another conversation to carry on once we get that judgment from the Supreme Court. Always insightful there, and always great to see you. Thank you very much for coming in. Stay where you are. Haven't finished yet. Aubrey's still with us, listening to that conversation, but another now for him after we've heard Robert there talking, pardon me, about the situation in Scotland. What of Wales? Matthew McKinnon is a Welsh political consultant and intriguingly former Welsh Conservative press officer. Great to see you and a very warm welcome to you. Can I put something to you that wasn't on the questions that I'd written to put to you, and that's something that my friend Robert's just raised, that there was an attempt, or there has been an attempt from Number 10 to try and bring the devolved nations, Wales and Scotland, and I presume Northern Ireland as well, together for a round table at Downing Street, and the only problem was diaries. Have you heard that from the Welsh end of it as well?
I have heard that's definitely something that's in the pipeline for them. One of the main promises that Liz Truss made during the leadership contest when she came to Cardiff was that she really wanted to ensure that the union unit especially was bolstered and improved. Because I've spoken to people in Wales, whether they're Welsh Parliament members, senior officials, and they don't feel the union unit has been as proactive and as influential as it could have been. And I think a round table with specialists from across Wales, not just representatives from the Senedd and the Scottish parliaments, but actual specialists on devolution and people who are influential within the political spectrum, will be very helpful to help the Westminster administration understand the complexities of devolved policy.
And I mentioned in my introduction to you, Matt, that you're former involved formerly in the press operation for the Conservative Party in Wales, and like Scotland, the relationship between the Conservative Party UK-wide and both Scotland and Wales is very much a rollercoaster. People look at a snapshot and think, oh, the Tories are nowhere in Scotland at the moment, they're nowhere in Wales. They have been very good in both of those nations in the past. Do you think that when she's got time to focus upon it, Truss can and should put more effort into not only restoring trust in the union, because that's what she believes in, but specifically in the detail of both Wales, where you live and work, and Scotland, where Robert lives and works?
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at the 2019 and 2021 Senedd elections, the Conservatives had their best ever results. So there was 16 members elected for the Welsh Conservatives in 2021, their best result since devolution in its current form took place. And in 2019, the Conservatives won a significant number of MPs in Wales, the most since the 1980s. So there is a significant proportion of the Welsh population who are willing to vote Conservative in the right when the time is right. So I think that, you know, ensuring that enough detail is enough time is spent focusing on places such as Wales and Scotland to ensure the union's future is vital. And for the last 20 years, we've seen nationalism and separatism rise at a level in which many in Westminster aren't really comprehending. And there's been a lot of focus on Scotland, but there really hasn't been the level of focus there should have been on places such as Wales. Nationalism in Wales, due to devolution and the fact that nationalists now are in coalition in Cardiff Bay with Plaid Cymru and Labour in a coalition, there's a significant amount of public sector money being awarded to these sort of nationalist organisations, and they're using it to their advantage. And I think as soon as Number 10 in the new operation can realise that if they pay a little bit of attention to Wales, they can hopefully try and make a big difference in stamping out a bit of nationalism here in Wales before it rises to the levels we currently see in Scotland.
How do you, as a professional communications guy, as well as somebody who eats and drinks politics, how would you advise the Prime Minister to nuance, as it were, that fact that the Conservative Party, both in Wales and in Scotland, have got to tear heck out of Mark Drakeford, who we saw pictures of while you were talking there, and Nicola Sturgeon, who Robert was talking about. You want the parties in the nations to be doing that, whilst you, as the United Kingdom Prime Minister, have to rise above that. Quite a tricky thing to nuance politically.
Very, very difficult for her to try and achieve. I think Prime Minister's questions are prime opportunity when Labour and Keir Starmer point out failures in the English NHS, for example. You know, they can point out that in Wales, there's the one place in the country that is run by Labour still, that there's, you know, the situation is far, far worse. Same goes for education, same goes for so many other areas of policy which are run by the socialists here in Wales. And I think the fact that the Prime Minister needs to be much more confident in pointing that out. I think a far more aggressive approach in terms of communication strategy would be vital. I think a lot of people have tried to cozy up really to the establishment in Cardiff Bay, because at the moment Wales is a one-party state. You know, you've had Wales run by Labour now since the late 1990s, and nothing's changed. So a lot of people are trying to cozy up in an attempt to sort of curry favour. But I think a much more pragmatic approach in actually trying to expose them would be a better option.
There's far too much grown-up talk on this programme today. Everybody talking good common sense, and I'm sure that our viewers and listeners will lap it up. Matthew McKinnon, first time we've spoken, a real pleasure, and I hope you'll keep in touch with us and that we can chew the Welsh fat again. That's Matthew McKinnon there, Welsh political consultant. Still sitting next to me in the studio, and I'm going to be shouted out for doing this, but I genuinely thought that was fascinating. If the pressure comes off Truss, even for the time being, because she's got Hunt in place, both Robert sitting next to you and Matthew down there in Wales are saying, look, focus on both Scotland and Wales because there are votes to be won, there are seats to be won.
Yes, absolutely. And Liz Truss is sort of in the dilemma where during the leadership contest, she did not get the ringing endorsement of, say, Welsh MPs or some of the very influential Scottish MPs as well. So she really needs to kind of broaden her base, make sure she's reaching to those people in the party as well, because ultimately they are the eyes and ears within Scotland, within her party.
But it doesn't, as both Robert and Matthew said, it doesn't preclude Scottish Tories or Welsh Tories beating 2 tons of out of Nicola Sturgeon and or Mark Drakeford, while the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom rises above it and tries to calm the waters.
Yeah, but that wasn't the behaviour that we saw from her during the leadership contest. I mean, she was saying that she would just ignore Nicola Sturgeon.
Oh, she was rude and brutal about both of them in the leadership contest.
Exactly, and she now that she's she obviously made similar comments about French President Emmanuel Macron. So, you know, it was something that she felt she had to do to sort of play to the base. But now she is Prime Minister. You would expect her to at least be calling the First Ministers of those.
I think Macron's OK now. I think Macron's back on the goodies side.
Friend again.
Robert, thanks for listening to that. I really enjoyed talking to you about Scotland and Matthew just then about Wales. But as I said, stay in touch. The minute we get that judgment from the Supreme Court, I want you back there talking about it. But for the time being...
And I don't detest the SNP or Nicola Sturgeon. I respect them for their views and I'm happy to argue with them. This detesting your opponents is so wrong. It's just so wrong.
I have to stop because we have to get to the break, with plenty more still to come in the final half hour of Alastair Stewart and Friends. The new Chancellor will be meeting with the Prime Minister later today, following weeks of political and economic turmoil. Our political correspondent will be joining us.
Head to this afternoon, and the UK is looking blustery with showers becoming confined to the far north. Elsewhere, mostly dry with sunny spells. Let's take a look at the details. Blustery showers continuing to affect the north and west of Scotland, but these easing later. Elsewhere, dry with decent sunny spells. Feeling cold with a high of 11 Celsius. Becoming increasingly cloudy across Northern Ireland, but the far north and east holding on to some sunshine well into the afternoon. Temperatures reaching 11 Celsius. Dry with prolonged sunny spells, it will become increasingly hazy from the west during the afternoon. Winds continue to increase into the evening. Fine and dry during the afternoon, but cloud will increase, heralding the arrival of outbreaks of rain from the west later. It'll be feeling fairly chilly in the wind with highs of 14 Celsius. Fine and dry with prolonged sunny spells for most across the Midlands, some patchy cloud around in places. Feeling chilly in the wind with temperatures near average with highs of 15 Celsius. It's a dry afternoon across East Anglia with plenty of sunshine. However, cloud will move across the region from the south later. Temperatures near average, reaching highs of 16 Celsius. Mostly dry across the south with a mix of cloud and sunny spells for many on Sunday afternoon. Cloud will continue to increase with outbreaks of rain arriving late in the day. Heading into the evening, cloud and rain accompanied with strong winds. Coastal gales developing in places. And that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello, good afternoon. It's 1:32. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. Here are the headlines. Fixing the UK economy is the new Chancellor's focus as he discusses his plan with the Prime Minister at Chequers this afternoon. Jeremy Hunt says his predecessor's mini-budget went too far, too fast, but he's warning the country still faces a difficult period. He says taxes won't be cut as quickly as people want and spending could be squeezed to help balance the books. The Home Secretary has announced plans to crack down on protests that cause serious disruption and threaten public safety. Suella Braverman says the measures aim to stop demonstrators from holding the public to ransom. She says police will be given new powers to take a more proactive approach, specifically targeting tactics used by some climate activists. The government is pushing ahead with a law to keep Britain moving during transport strikes. Legislation will be introduced to ensure minimum service levels are maintained during a walkout. Unions are criticising the move, saying it'll be unworkable. The measures are expected to come into force next year. Firefighters are tackling a large blaze in Glasgow. Scottish Fire and Rescue was called to Kingston Street in the Tradeston area just before 10 o'clock this morning. People are being advised to close their windows and stay away from the area. There are no reports of any injuries. Just Stop Oil protesters have vandalised an Aston Martin car showroom in central London. Demonstrators sat on Park Lane with some gluing themselves to the road. One protester then sprayed orange paint over the luxury car maker's building. The group is demanding the government halts all new oil and gas licences. TV, online and DAB plus radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Alastair.
Tamsin, thanks very much indeed. As you just heard in Tamsin's news bulletin, the Prime Minister and her new Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, will indeed be working on restoring faith and stability when they meet later on today, following weeks of economic turmoil and policy U-turns. Speaking to Laura Koonsberg on the BBC this morning, he also said that there will be no return of the 2010-style austerity. Well, joining me now for the latest on what's going out and going on in the real world of politics while we sit here in the studio is our very own political correspondent, Catherine Forster. Aubrey, when he did his 12 o'clock slot and then came back for 1 o'clock, had picked up on two more people who'd let him know that they were Tory MPs putting in their letters of no confidence. And I've had a tweet email from Kelly who says, if Liz Truss no longer commands a confidence majority, shouldn't she be visiting King Charles and asking for a general election? Isn't that the rules? Is there evidence, in your view, of people really trying to get those numbers together for another topple attempt?
Yes.
I mean,
Ouch.
The Sunday Times, and let's be clear, the only person who knows how many letters have gone in is the chair of the 1922 committee, Sir Graham Brady, who's currently on a holiday in Athens, but will be back tomorrow. The Sunday Times are reporting 100. Now, at the moment, she's safe for a year, potentially, but all the 1922 committee have to do is change the rules. I was just in touch with a backbench MP who's been a massive supporter of hers, and they said, pretty sure it's all over. The only person, in their view, who has a mandate from the country and from the members is Boris Johnson, but that the parliamentary party will not allow that. I mean, they just got rid of him, didn't they? So the plotting, rather than things calming down with her changing the Chancellor, that doesn't seem to have had much effect at all. Some talk now, I mean, we've been hearing about Penny Mordaunt, Rishi Sunak, some talk now about, if Ben Wallace is willing, putting those three names to MPs. What I'm pretty sure of is that the membership will be completely cut out of this decision, and then one of them would be immediately eliminated, and the others would see if they could come to
But also, just to build in, because it's part of the same logic, that what I'm picking up from a lot of people as well, is that even if the membership are cut out, and even Dan Hodges, great commentator, albeit slightly from the Labour side of it, saying one thing is clear, as with the Corbyn experience with Labour, never again can the ordinary members really settle this once and for all. That the one thing the members will not buy, and that is Rishi Sunak being crowned, because he was the one they did not want, because partly they still blame him for toppling Boris.
Well, yes, they absolutely did. But, I mean, come on, there's no way that Liz Truss hasn't wanted this job for a long time. They do say, don't they, whoever wields the knife never wears the crown. But I think we're at a point now, as Michael Portillo was saying earlier, that these are really desperate times for the Conservative Party, and desperate measures are called for. And so I think the MPs will do what they think is necessary to save their own skins, to save their seats, potentially, regardless of the wrath of Conservative Party members at this point.
Michael also brilliantly, because Michael's brilliant, used the analogy of Dunkirk, which was an historic retreat from the beaches of France to get back to what was left of the expeditionary force to the United Kingdom. And it was several years later that D-Day happened, and then our troops and American troops and Canadians joined forces to then conquer Nazi Germany. Big gap between Dunkirk and D-Day. I'm not sure the Tories have got that amount of time, have they? If we're sticking with the Portillo analogy.
No, I mean, things can change very fast, can't they? Only in 2019, the Conservatives were in a terrible state over Brexit. There was deadlock in Parliament. And then, lo and behold, Boris Johnson came along, took the whip from a couple of dozen of them, got an 80-seat majority, got Brexit done. But those are very different circumstances to now.
Yeah.
They involved a change of leader and a booting out of a number of Conservative MPs, and the fear of Jeremy Corbyn. And, of course, Jeremy Corbyn is gone. But now, I mean, some Conservative MPs are saying that Liz Truss is their equivalent electorally because they are so worried.
Final very, very quick one. Somebody else picked up from that Koonsberg interview with Jeremy Hunt this morning that he seemed to be hinting 18 months to a general election that kind of theoretically might mean the spring of 25 rather than what I thought was the consensus that it would be October 24. Is that just people up to no good, or is that right?
I think they can go, because it was December 19, I think they can go to January or maybe slightly later into 2025. And you would wonder whether, I mean, given the economic turmoil around the globe, let's be fair, not just in Britain, surely they would want to give themselves as long as
an everyday week may matter. Catherine Forster, always brilliant. Great to see you. Thank you for giving us so much of your time this Sunday afternoon. Catherine Forster there, GB News political correspondent. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart, and indeed, my friends, with plenty more still to come in the final 20 minutes of the programme, including, they're at it again, Extinction Rebellion are back on the streets of London, blocking roads and marching through Westminster as part of their 3-day climate protest. We will have the latest from there, but first, a quick break.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
For helping our great nation.
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV.
On radio.
and online. We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's
News channel.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
17 minutes to 2, you're watching and listening to the final part of Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News TV and Radio. Let's get some more of your thoughts on our big discussion of the day, the current state of the Conservative Party and Liz Truss's leadership and prospects. Anne says, can someone please tell me how the government can afford to spend millions on illegal migrants but be unable to channel these millions to where they're most needed in aid of the most basics of our own citizens, housing, healthcare, education, for example. No wonder the general public are sick to the back teeth with all the shenanigans of everyone who's trying to hold back Great Britain from getting on in the world. We need to control our own borders, our own laws, and sort out the Irish protocol fast. Tony joins the conversation. Do your guests feel that the Conservative membership should be the ones to decide the next Tory leader, given they don't understand what Trussonomics would be so damaging, and we are at odds with the parliamentary wishes who know the candidates better? Thanks for the question, Tony. I think they feel that the membership probably should not be involved in it, but that is a matter for them, not a matter for me. I'm not a member of the Conservative Party, so I don't have a view on it. Paul says Jeremy Hunt's a control freak. Hunting, nice play on words there, Paul. Hunting for power. He's wiped the floor with the members and has shown them no respect. Hunt's taken it upon himself to gate crash into the position of a democratically elected PM to try and steal the position. The whole thing is disgusting. Actually, it's been appointed by that democratically chosen Prime Minister as Chancellor of the Exchequer, just to try and keep it calm and in balance, Paul. Finally, Richard says the first step was to displace Boris for the most unusual collection of reasons. That's one of life's great understatements. The second step was to move to displace Truss for doing exactly what she'd promised in her leadership campaign. I made that point myself as well, Richard. This really looks like a coup to put a chosen, but not notably elected, which is disturbing. I think there was the word missing there, which is person. But Richard, Paul, Tony and all of you there, thank you so much. We've got time before the end of the programme. In a quarter of an hour's time, we'll get some more in, but I think we're up against it a bit now. But thank you very much indeed for those thoughts. Keep them coming in. Now, as I said a moment ago, eco-activists Extinction Rebellion are staging 3 days of climate protests in London this weekend, culminating in a march on Westminster, which is expected to reach Parliament Square in the next half hour. Follows 12 days of protests, resulting in widespread disruption and vandalism. The group are demanding urgent government action on the climate crisis. GB News reporter Jeff Moody has been to see the demonstrations for himself and now shares his views on what it's all about.
Security! You can hear the disbelief in the man's voice as he calls for security. Two protesters throwing tomato soup at one of the most precious pieces of art in the world. They want to just stop oil, but the only oil here is in the paint. Last week it was cheese. They poured milk over the dairy counter at Selfridges.
Do you guys not intervene? You don't? We're not allowed.
And this is what's angering so many. We're not allowed to stop them, say Selfridges staff. Even when they throw paint at Scotland Yard itself. For many, the police's lightness of touch is a sign of weakness. Rumours abound the police have been handing out cups of tea. Met Police Commissioner Sir Mark Rawley is defending his force's lack of force.
I haven't seen the cups of tea point, and I hope we haven't been doing that because I don't think we should be. I agree with you. That's not our responsibility. Are these protests? Are they currently, or are they heading towards causing serious disruption to the life of the community? And over the last 11 days, all of those partners have been of view that it doesn't cause serious disruption.
Many are saying, if this isn't serious disruption, then what is? They glue themselves to the street. They block roads. An ambulance forced to find another route. Just Stop Oil say these protests are the only way to get their message across.
I think we've seen with all the strike action that's happening, you don't get anything by just sitting on the sidelines and sitting and wishing. Yeah. You have to make it unignorable, and we have been ignored for so long.
But it's not just oil. Insulate Britain out too. Here gluing themselves to the pavement outside Parliament to disrupt Prime Minister's question time. This weekend, the turn of Extinction Rebellion. A mass sit-in, events and speakers, culminating in a march on Westminster this afternoon. They say the government's policies are unjust. They say the climate crisis is being ignored. They say they're aiming for 100,000 on the streets by 2023. They're marching from Hyde Park to Parliament Square in what they're calling a show of strength. Many now wondering who has the strength to stop them before someone gets seriously hurt or worse. Jeff Moody, GB News.
So there you have it. We'll keep an eye on that, but I remain completely aghast, confused and discombobulated how anyone can think that disrupting people going about their ordinary lawful lives and disrupting the right of people to trade and sell foodstuffs is going to advance any cause at all. It just looks like being a bunch of craziness going down, 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 down. But there we are. You pays your money, you makes your choices. Much more serious stuff. Every 5 minutes, someone in the United Kingdom will have a stroke. And a new mum who suffered a rare stroke 5 weeks after giving birth wants to raise awareness of how pregnant women and new mums can be affected. The 28-year-old mum from Buckinghamshire had to learn to walk and talk again after a cerebral venous thrombosis. GB News reporter Alice Porter went to meet her and has the story.
I mean, in that moment, essentially, I thought I was going to die.
Alice was just getting used to her life with a 5-week-old baby when the symptoms of a stroke suddenly began.
I sort of struggled to get out of bed, to get to the bathroom, and in the end, my husband had to kind of carry me down the stairs. Could, by this point, not move my right arm above sort of my head.
Hello, space station. In hospital, Alice was diagnosed with a cerebral venous thrombosis, a rare condition which often causes stroke-like symptoms. Partially paralysed, she also suffered 2 seizures. She began her recovery on a stroke ward, the youngest person by decades.
I was completely bedbound, was unable to kind of go to the toilet, to eat, to feed myself, to sit up. Obviously wasn't able to breastfeed, couldn't couldn't pump myself either, so I was having to explain to the nurses while struggling with language and speech a lot. And I think being a young mum, I just felt that he wouldn't see me grow up, he wouldn't know me, and kind of thought a lot about the impact that would have on, like, my husband. So yeah, I guess that was really difficult.
1 in 1,000 women will have a blood clot during pregnancy or in the 6 weeks after giving birth. Consequently, pregnancy and childbirth increase women's risk of a stroke. Professor Beverly Hunt is Medical Director of Thrombosis UK.
Their blood gets more sticky, and it starts very early on, soon after conception. And the time when the blood is stickiest is the 6 weeks after giving birth. A lot of women who die in pregnancy are dying from pulmonary emboli. So it's an ongoing problem, and obstetricians and haematologists are very aware of this and will give women at high risk small doses of blood thinners to take.
As she continues to recover, Alice uses social media to raise awareness of the dangers of blood clots so that more families can spot the potentially fatal signs.
Not everybody will have seizures, not everybody will lose sort of motion and have that stroke element. So sometimes I've heard other people's stories around people just being dismissed as a migraine, but sort of knowing this and just really pushing and making sure, I think is invaluable.
Alice Porter, GB News.
Very, very important story there. Thanks, Alice. My final guest today on the trials and tribulations of the government and the Conservatives is another been-there, done-it figure. Lord Peter Lilly, former Trade Minister, former Shadow Chancellor and former Conservative Member of Parliament. Peter, you told me you were warm to a lot of what was in the Kwasi-Kwarteng budget, but do you accept now that it was right for Liz Truss to water it down in the face of political and economic turbulence, or should she have tried to stand her ground?
Did I tell you that? I voted for Rishi Sunak, but I wanted her to succeed and I wanted Kwasi to succeed. It clearly did go too far, too fast. Got the priorities wrong. The good thing is the priority being growth. The way to accelerate growth is through supply-side reforms. That in turn will make tax cuts possible, but you don't begin with the tax cuts before you've got the growth and before you've got control of public spending.
It's a fascinating distinction. Would you accept also what Tobias Ellwood said to me on this programme yesterday, where he said at least this crazy right-wing experimental economics has been seen off? Tobias wasn't saying it was a question of timing. He was saying that the philosophy, the fiscal philosophy, was crazy.
Well, I think Tobias is a bit wayward in his views. I really don't think they're very much worth commenting on, frankly. He was trying to persuade me we ought to be invading, sending an army to Ukraine the other day, and I think that is so extreme. We should possibly just get back to the centre ground of talking about what should be done. What should be done is getting control of expenditure. Expenditure had to rise during the COVID period, and we've got huge demands from the cost of living crisis. But why did it go up and not come down after the COVID crisis? We should be looking for the areas where it went up and should go back to the previous levels. And if we do, it will be easier to get a better balance of taxation than we've got to do otherwise.
Is it that I take your point about your critique of other observations, and my precious time with you is for you, but I want to drill into that particularly, something that a mutual friend said earlier on this programme, which was Damien Green, who was saying that what Hunt has got to come up with, building upon exactly what you've just said, although he didn't know that you were going to say it but may have guessed, that once the measures are in place, it has to be good enough to convince the city, good enough to convince the money market so that interest rates don't go bonkers, the pound doesn't collapse. Do you have any worries as an experienced former minister that our politics are judged so profoundly by the money men and women, or is that just how it has to be?
It's how it has to be. If you want to borrow lots of money, you've got to convince the people that are going to lend it to you that they're going to get it back. and it's not going to lose its value too much in the meantime. That's always been the case, always will be the case, and we've just got to recognise that. It was probably easier to convince them during the period of low interest rates. And low inflation. We're now suffering a significant inflation, partly because we printed too much money, partly because of the Ukrainian problems. That means that the markets are much more worried about getting their money back at full value. They're much more focused on whether we're going to be able to pay for what we borrow, and so we have to convince them. But it's not their fault, it's just sensible. If I lend money, I really want to know that I'm going to get it back, otherwise it's a gift.
Do you believe that the combination, and I made clear in my brief introduction, that it's a compromise combination now that sits at the very head of your party, of a badly wounded Liz Truss and a clean pair of hands Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, both of whom you know and know fairly well? Can they pull it off, or is it the last chance saloon that they're about to be thrown out of?
That'll depend on members of Parliament. And my advice to members of Parliament is that they should rapidly let their whip and perhaps the chairman of the Conservative Party, of the 22 committee, know their views, but they shouldn't be broadcasting them in public. We've had far too much undermining of leaders through people babbling in public. And so I'm going to set an example by not actually giving my view what should happen to the leadership. But if I were a member of Parliament, I would certainly let my whip and the chairman of the 1922 committee know those views.
Fascinating, because my final point briefly then is Catherine Forster and also Aubrey Allegretti, two frontline journalists, are saying the Sunday Times are now reporting that as many as 100 MPs are saying she's got to go. Peter Lilly, absolutely crystal clear. Shut up and get on with it.
Yeah.
Peter, it's always a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed for breaking into your Sunday afternoon to spend time with us. You're always welcome on this programme. Peter Lilly there, as I said, been there, done it, man. Advice to all other members of Parliament, just shut up and let's try and see if we can get on with it, and we'll report on that next weekend. But for now, enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and I'll see you same time, same place on Saturday. Bye-bye for now.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on